Good morning. Welcome to the First Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Ann Arbor, Michigan. I'm the Reverend Cassandra Hartley, and I have the honor of serving this congregation as executive minister. And I'm joined this morning by our senior minister, the Reverend Manish Mishra-Marzetti, the Reverend Theresa Rohlck, our Congregational Chaplain, and the director of the Handbell Choir, the Chalice Bells, our Pianist-in-Residence, Allison Halerz, our technology consultant, Mike Halerz, and of course, countless other staff and volunteers who come together each week to make our time possible. And of course, our time together is also possible because of the gift of your presence. So thank you for joining us, whether you're here in person or on live stream, whether you live across town and we're celebrating the big win against Ohio State last night, or whether you live on the other side of the world and have a different understanding of what football means. Whether you're a long-timer, a newcomer, or something in between, welcome to you all. If you are new to our community and you want to learn more about us, there is a newcomer welcome after both services in the Jackson Chapel. It's just out those doors on the right-hand side past the social hall. And it's a great chance to meet congregants and staff, ask questions, and make new connections. Each Sunday, it's a joy to welcome new visitors in person and online. So if you're new, thank you for trusting us with your time. And we also want to extend a special thanks and welcome to the members of the All Souls Community Church of West Michigan, who are joining us online today. It's one of the silver linings of this time that we can be in community together in new ways like this. Today is a special day to gather for so many reasons. Those who celebrate Thanksgiving or the harvest are ending a beautiful snowy holiday weekend. Advent begins today for those who honor the Advent season. And Hanukkah begins tonight for those who celebrate that holiday. We will be exploring Hanukkah and the theme of miracles and joy more next week. But this week we pause to reflect on the harvest theme of gratitude. So let us move deeper into our time together now as Reverend Manish leads us in a call to worship.
Good morning. As we continue deepening this time, I invite you to find a place of stillness, a place of centering and groundedness in your hearts as we hear the words of this reading entitled Harvest Time, published in a book called Bless the Imperfect. I am the author. Let us ground ourselves in this season. Ground ourselves here in this time and space. Winter is indeed upon us. Our last task before it has been the harvest. Seeds have yielded all manner of fruit, all manner of consequences. We enter this sacred space bringing our whole selves, the parts we like and the parts we don't like. We come together each individually with our own harvest, seeking here a word of comfort, an experience of beauty, inspiration to guide us. Let us ground ourselves in that purpose, ground ourselves in body and heart. Winter is upon us. Sunlight gives way to night. The coldness grows closer. Gathering together, we seek warmth in one another's company. Seek the eternal light that permeates all. Whatever your harvest, whatever your pain or joy, here you are welcome and will be held. Let the warmth flow to you and through you. Feel the healing strength of this community. Know that here you are not alone. that here you have found companions for the journey. Grounded in that spirit, grounded in the spirit of thanksgiving, come, let us worship. As we continue this time and move into our chalice lighting, I'd like to invite one of our community's newer friends, Mojtaba Akavan Tafti, will help us light our chalice this morning. Thank you for that, Mojtaba. And as he prepares to do so, I'd invite us to turn to our familiar words of chalice lighting, the words that help hold the flame of love, the flame of hope and possibility that we kindle together every week. Let us say, we light this chalice for the light of truth. We light this chalice for the warmth of love. We light this chalice for the energy of action. We light this chalice for the harmony of peace. Thank you, Mojtaba. A community such as ours is not grounded together, gathered together around any specific credo or set of beliefs that we are all required to adhere to or believe, but rather we gather together around the ways in which we will be together, the spirit of community that we seek to bring alive continuously among us. That spirit is captured in our community's covenant. Would you join together as we now say those words? The spirit of this church is love, and service is its law. This is our covenant with each other, to dwell together in peace, to search for truth and love, and to help one another. May it always be so.
As we continue our exploration of gratitude, I want to share a beautiful children's story about how to find gratitude even in hard times. It's called 10 Beautiful Things, and it's written by Molly Beth Griffin and illustrated by Maribel Lechuga. Lily ran her finger across the Iowa map. An X marked Gran's house on an empty patch of land, Lily's new home. Graham's car tires hummed against the pavement. Lily felt the vibration in her hollow chest. Let's try to find 10 beautiful things along the way, Graham said. Lily turned her eyes to the window. There's nothing beautiful here, she said. She struggled to fold the map so it nestled into itself just right. You'd be surprised, Graham said. And sure enough, at that very moment, the sun broke over the long horizon. Lily gasped. There's number 1, she cried. Right you are, Lily, Graham said. Fence posts rushed past. Graham flipped on the radio, trying to fill the silence. Lily felt the complaints starting in her belly again, coming up her throat and nearly out her mouth. But then Graham shouted, number 2! A wind farm had sprouted in the field beside the freeway. Spinning windmill blades gleamed in the morning sun. Lily concentrated on the game and found number 3 real fast. A red-winged blackbird perched on a swaying stalk of last year's corn. It was dark and bright all at once, its beak wide open in a song they couldn't hear. Later, Graham signaled and turned the car onto a smaller road. 2 more highways to go, she said. Lily popped a handful of crackers into her mouth, but food didn't fill up her hollow places. Graham cracked her window, and in rushed air and sound and cold. They crossed a bridge, and Graham chose number 4, the gurgly sound of a melting creek. Lily dozed off. She woke up when Graham tapped her knee and pointed out a falling apart barn. "That's not pretty," Lily said. "That can't count." "We're not looking for pretty. We want beautiful," Graham said. So it stood, halfway to 10. At a rest area, Lily bounced out of the car while Graham stretched her creaky body. Lily picked number 6. "The smell of mud," she said, inhaling. Graham shut her eyes and nodded slowly. "It's earthy and rich," she said. "I'd never really noticed." Lily breathed in the mud smell and focused on just that. It poured itself into some of the empty spaces in her. Back on the road again, the car seemed smaller. The humming in Lily had stopped, but her legs wanted to sprawl, and her stomach was getting queasy. "We're on a roll now," Graham said, and she was right about that. 7 and 8 were easy. A cloud shaped like a swan, and a little brown calf that trotted beside the fence. Miles and miles later, they turned onto their last road, and the clouds began to draw close. The sky grew dark. The earth rumbled. Suddenly, the air exploded in bright flashes. Cloud banks traded lightning back and forth, showing off. "Number 9, Lily whispered. There was no room for other words. The storm took up the whole world, and it filled Lily up too. She was here with Graham, and for a whole minute, that was all that mattered. On they drove, almost there, not far now. When they'd been almost there for a long time, Graham braked, eased the car down a crumbling driveway, and parked in front of a farmhouse. "Here we be," she said, through the drum of the rain. "Home." "But we only made it to 9, Lily said, slumping in her seat. "Nope. 10. Easy." Graham came around with the umbrella and Lily stepped out of the car. "We're 10, Graham said. Lily sank into her familiar hug. None of this was easy. Maybe it would never be easy. But she belonged with Graham now. She belonged here, now. The end.
On this Sunday in which we focus on gratitude, let me first express my gratitude to each and all for being here, for watching on live stream, for showing up, because you know the work of building our beloved community needs all of us. So thank you. You also know the work of building our beloved community takes resources. And I thank you for all the ways you contribute, your time, volunteering, offering your talents and skills, teaching, and your financial gifts. For the gifts you give each week, in addition to your annual pledge, thank you. For your annual pledge that you have already made, thank you. For your anticipated annual pledge, You can do that today and give me another reason to thank you. There is someone at a table out in the hallway to help you make the pledge. But thank you for your generosity. If you are in a position to make a financial gift today, wonderful. And if you are new to us or just visiting, know that your presence is your gift. You may give by text or at uuaa.org/giving. You can leave cash or check in the baskets right at the back of the sanctuary on the way out. It's your turn. Make your practice of gratitude active as you give to the programs and ministries of this congregation. What is it about this congregation that you are grateful for? Thank you. If you would rise in body or spirit in all the ways you are able, and join me in speaking together the words of our dedication, which I'm going to screen. I forgot that one. Here we go. If you would say the words with me together. To the work of this congregation, which is weaving a tapestry of love and action, we dedicate our lives, and these are offerings. Please have a seat.
These days, it feels like the language of uncertainty is everywhere. Phrases like, if we can ever do this again, or someday when this is truly over, or let's plan on it for now and see what happens, make their way into most of my conversations. The past nearly 2 years have brought so much grief and stress, and yet even for those who have fared relatively well, the constant change is taking a toll. That toll can show up as increased anxiety, depression, anger, exhaustion, and so much more. Layered on top of all of this is the fall season, and for those who celebrate it, Thanksgiving. This is no longer a traditional harvest time for most of us, but it's still a time when we naturally turn inward to reflect on our lives and practice gratitude for what we have. This year, I was struggling with what it means to find gratitude in the midst of so much uncertainty and upheaval, and if it's possible to find some gratitude for uncertainty itself. That's when I stumbled across some journals I had written many, many years ago, and I was skimming through the entries, reminiscing, when I came across one particular entry that made me stop. It was about a time I was taking an intensive world religions course, so we spent 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, visiting various temples, synagogues, mosques, churches, and other spiritual centers throughout Metro Detroit region. At one point, we ended up at a beautiful Christian church with expansive gardens. We took a tour of the building, and then we stopped in the gardens at a large, intricate labyrinth made out of rock. Many of us had never walked a labyrinth before, so our guide explained that it's not like a maze. There's only one way in and one way out. He advised us to begin our walk by clearing our minds and focusing on a spiritual question or a mantra or a prayer. There are many different ways to approach the labyrinth, so he suggested we try to let go as we walked in, pray or meditate when we got to the center, and then return with what we received. It was a symbol of our journey into our deepest selves, a symbol of our journey to connect with whatever we find most sacred. So I stood at the entrance to the labyrinth and reflected on what my spiritual question would be. I had a toddler at home at the time who had been born with a genetic condition called albinism. And his first year, I struggled with deep grief and fear about what his life would be like as someone who was legally blind and sensitive to the sun. He also had many developmental delays that were not explained by albinism, but what they did mean was not yet clear. Now I was pregnant with another son, and I wondered if he too would have albinism and the same delays. I was at the beginning of seminary and still had no idea what my future career would look like. And I was struggling in my marriage, but didn't know what to do about it. The number of spiritual questions to pick from seemed endless, but I eventually chose to focus on how I could manage the fear of my son's uncertain future and be the best parent that I could be. I set that as my question, took a deep breath, and started walking. There were many other people walking with me, of course, and we were all going at different paces, which meant that very quickly we were all in different places throughout the labyrinth, and I started to feel disoriented. I would look up from the path and see someone coming toward me, and I would get afraid that somehow I had messed up. If I tried to look at the path ahead of me to figure out where I was going, or if I tried to look behind me and retrace my steps, I only got more confused. The only thing that worked was to close my eyes, take another deep breath, then open them again and stay focused on just that one next step forward. At times, the path dipped in toward the center, and I thought, oh good, I'm getting close to the end. I'm getting close to that center. But then I would get frustrated because the path would seem to veer away toward the edge again. I realized I had to stop trying to anticipate and instead just trust that the path would get me to the center eventually, which of course it did. I paused there for several minutes, meditating on my spiritual question. There was no lightning bolt moment or crystal clear answer, only the slow realization that the path I had just walked was itself the answer. I spent most of my life thinking that I was traveling a path toward some clear, bright future on the distant horizon. Sure, there would be dips in the road and detours, maybe some obstacles, but even then, the future would always be in sight. Of course, my actual life, especially parenting, was a labyrinth, one that I walk again and again, each time learning new things, but never with a clear future in sight. If I wasted time paying attention to where other people were on the path, or worrying about whether I had messed up, or trying to retrace my steps, or trying to anticipate what was coming, I would only cause myself more pain and confusion. The only thing that mattered was that next step. Standing at the center of the labyrinth with this realization at first made me sigh. It seemed that 99% of all of my spiritual questions could be answered with, stay present, let go of control, and be grateful for what you have. These were truths I already knew, and yet I had to learn them again. But the more I sat with these truths, the more I softened, until eventually I began to cry. Large tears quietly rolled down my cheeks as I retraced my steps back out of the labyrinth, this time with none of the stress and frustration I had brought into it. I went home later that day and wrote about my experience in my journal and vowed to do my best to be a parent who is grateful and present. I'd love to say that I learned my lesson that day and never forgot it. But of course, that's not true. Here I am in the midst of a global pandemic 13 years later, still trying to integrate these truths. Being reminded of that experience and the lessons I learned was just what I needed for this time. But what was even more helpful was reflecting on uncertainty itself. I felt deep compassion for that younger version of myself, a terrified mom, student, and wife who desperately wanted to know what was coming next. And yet, what if I could go back and tell her everything that was about to happen? What if I could tell her that her older son would eventually be diagnosed with autism on top of albinism, that her next son would have albinism too, that she'd have a daughter without albinism, that she'd end up going into parish ministry and getting her dream job at her own home congregation, that she'd end up getting a divorce and starting a totally different life, that she would experience countless major events that she couldn't have even begun to anticipate back then. Knowing a list of these facts wouldn't have helped her cope at all. In fact, it probably would have overwhelmed her completely. Because facts don't even begin to capture the highs and the lows, the depth of all the emotions, the lessons learned, and most importantly, the strength built slowly, almost imperceptibly, one step at a time. I can look at my past self from a distance and feel compassion for her because I'm a different person now. And if I'm lucky enough to live another 13 years, I'm sure I'll look back on my current self the same way. I would love the certainty of knowing what's going to happen in the next hour, much less the next day or week or year, 10 years. But the truth is, I can't know, and I probably shouldn't know. And for that, I'm trying to be grateful. It's fitting that around the same time I was rereading my journal entries, I stumbled across this poem from one of my favorite poets, Jan Richardson. And she wrote this poem in honor of World Labyrinth Day, which I did not know was a thing. She calls this poem Walking Blessing. A walking blessing, that each step may be a shedding, that you will let yourself become lost, that when it looks like you're going backwards, you may be making progress, that progress is not the goal anyway, but presence, to the feel of the path on your skin, to the way it reshapes you in each place it makes contact, to the way you cannot see it until the moment you have stepped out. May it be so for us all, and blessed be.
What a gorgeous reflection, Cassie. Thank you so much for sharing your spirit and your wisdom with us. Absolutely lovely. I'd love to share with you the words of a British author, bestseller on both sides of the Atlantic. His name is Matt Haig. This is a small piece from his July 2021 nonfiction release entitled The Comfort Book, a small essay called The Most Important Kind of Wealth. He writes, in 1981, American philosophy graduate Stephen Callahan found himself adrift in the Atlantic Ocean for 76 days. He'd been sailing a sloop that he had designed and built himself called the Napoleon Solo. He was 7 days into a voyage from Cornwall to Antigua in the Caribbean. One night, during a storm, the boat was hit by a whale. The boat was quickly flooded and started to sink. Callahan escaped onto an inflatable life raft, but also managed to hold his breath and dive down into his sinking boat a few times to grab some essential supplies, small amount of food, navigation charts, flares, a spear gun, a sleeping bag. Then he was set entirely adrift from the sinking boat. He was 800 miles west of the Canary Islands, but heading in the opposite direction. He had enough food and water to last him just a few days. He fished with the spear gun and made water with a solar still, a contraption that evaporates salt water and distills it and then purifies it. It took him days just to get it working properly. There were many moments of dashed hope. On the 14th day, he saw a ship and lit a flare, and he thought it had been seen, but no such luck. He saw other ships, but again, no one saw him, and soon he was south of the major shipping lanes, heading into hotter and hotter weather. The discomfort was immense. The hunger, the thirst, the heat, the sores resulting from the salt water on his skin. Mentally, it was also tough. Not just the continual threat of sharks, but his own thoughts. He says, I had a lot of time to think, and I regretted every mistake I'd ever made. I was divorced, and I felt like I had failed at human relations generally, at business, and now even at sailing. I desperately wanted to get through this so I could make a better job of my life. 50 days in, things were looking hopeless. He had spent over a week trying to keep the damaged raft afloat with a pump, and he just had no more energy. He broke down, but pulled himself together just enough to find a way to temporarily fix his damaged raft. Then his contraption to purify the water broke as well. He knew logically he was going to die, as he had only 3 cans of water left. He felt his mind as well as his body shutting down. He had lost already 1/3 of his weight. He had nothing else to give. His use of flares and beacons had triggered no rescue attempts. He says, I could feel all the people who had ever been lost at sea with me and around me. At some point, he threw discarded fish bones and guts back into the sea, which caused seabirds to hover above him. The seabirds drew the attention of some fishermen from the Guadalupe archipelago in the Caribbean. They found Callahan on his 76th day in his raft, took him to shore, where he would eventually recover in a hospital. Although the ordeal was terrifying and nearly cost him his life, Callahan didn't regret going through it, and it never dissuaded him from giving up sailing, never stopped him from sailing again. In his book, Adrift, 76 Days Lost at Sea, he writes about how he no longer regrets his life and how he's learned to be grateful. He says, my plight has given me a strange kind of wealth, the most important kind. I value each moment that is not spent in pain, in desperation, in hunger, in thirst, or in loneliness. Even more remarkable is his memory of beautiful moments within the ordeal. The sight of a clear, starry night sky overwhelmed him with awe. In his words, a view of heaven from a seat in hell. Thus ends our reading. Our sailor, Stephen Callahan, says he found a strange kind of wealth, learning how to be grateful. with a view from heaven, from a seat in hell. His hell being stuck in a difficult situation he didn't know how to get out of. His microcosm experience mirroring elements of our own current collective experience. The ongoing pandemic, where now even the triple vaccinated can rest with the uncertainty of an Omicron variant who knows what it may or may not mean. All while a sixth mass extinction of flora and fauna globally continues. Climate devastation that our politicians are unable to effectively address. Discord and harmony in our own civil society that to such an extent that it makes the word united in the name of our nation almost seem paradoxical. And on I could add to this list, you could as well. Stephen Callahan may have been adrift at sea in a life raft, but so are we. Our boat's just larger. It's what we in our Unitarian Universalist hymn call our blue boat home. No less a shared journey, no less without tremendous difficulties and challenges, moments of feeling despair. And yet, in the same way that hymn, Blue Boat Home, pulls me toward a sense of something larger, something grander, our spaceship Earth, the ethos and aspiration of love, the best that we can be together in community, so does Stephen Callahan's story, his experience, his turning to and noticing, finding some sense of holding on to transcendence, wonder, possibility through looking at the stars. Beauty held him, guided him in the midst of a terrible ordeal. Beauty. And then we lose sight at times. We forget that there aren't just the plot twists that further challenge us, make life feel more difficult and aggravating. There are also the positive plot twists, the ones that are gorgeous, that add meaning and richness to our lives, that can even be life-saving, as they were in Callahan's case. No amount of flares led to his rescue. It was the chance act of discarding fish bones and guts that attracted seagulls, that attracted fishermen, that led to a rescue. Positive plot twists exist as well, what some of us call grace, positive happenstance. Cassie's beautiful sharing this morning took me back to my own experiences of being in seminary, the final year of which was one in which I went through my own experience of a divorce. One that I asked for, and yet in our U.S. culture that has its own highly problematic aspects to it. We're a culture that when a marriage doesn't work out, we look for assigning blame. Why didn't it work out? Who's to blame that it didn't work out? The person who asked for the divorce, surely they gave up on the concept of marriage, on the relationship that they took vows to commit to. We do this as a culture, not our best side always. And what ensued for me in that reality that I had not anticipated, because I'd never been through it before, I lost every common friend that existed as a result of that marriage. Every last one, just about. An already painfully difficult experience made exponentially harder by the unforeseen terrain that I was navigating, all while I'm trying to get through graduate school classes at Harvard. What ensued in those months was a depression. It was a very difficult time for me. And I remember distinctly the early spring days in Cambridge, walking on Harvard's campus past a tree that I'd walked by hundreds of times, no doubt, over years. And I noticed, and I stopped. The first spring flower, I didn't even remember that this was a flowering tree, but it was, and the first pink flowers were emerging on this tree, and it totally captivated me. I stopped in my tracks and just stood there for minutes, staring at the miracle of life and this gorgeous pink flowers, and the remembrance that life is not always difficult and painful, that the world has beauty and miracles in it too. And it became a piece of the fog lifting, my ability to notice and remember the beauty, the transcendence of that beauty that we are a part of, that is all around us. And yet more occurred too. I lost many longtime friends, and yet it was my newer friends, my Unitarian Universalist friends, that showed up for me and created a community for me that I wasn't even capable of asking for. They just did it, inviting me out for walks, taking me out for dinner, dragging me out of my basement apartment when I didn't want to even leave it. The positive plot twists exist as well. The boons, the grace. Our presence to the fullness of what actually exists, opens us up to beauty. It opens us up to noticing the positive happenstances that so meaningfully impact our lives. And through that, the beauty and the grace, we can move seamlessly, effortlessly towards this sense of gratitude. My goodness, what a blessing to be alive on a single day that drops the miracle of unique crystalline snowflakes that melt in the palm of your hands, where community shows up and just gathers and organizes to support you because you're in need. What a beautiful thing it is to be alive for any and all of that and so much more. And here's what's even better. If we can allow these things to touch us as deeply as they are capable of, to shift us towards that profound sense of genuine gratitude, we can find gratitude even for the very hard, challenging, painful things that show up. This pandemic, reminding us that the cult of individuality is not where health and healing and wellness resides. Health and healing always occurs with others, with support. The word public in public health means something. It's a collective commitment to collective welfare, our shared welfare. The fissures in our social and civic society reminding us that, hearkening back hundreds of years ago, this nation's foundations were not built on equality. They were not, never. Women were not included. Black folk were called chattel in the founding documents. This society's foundations were not built on equality. And therefore, we have worked over successive generations to rewrite, to reimagine, to modify and make better the original intentions and commitments of this nation. The current fissures remind us that that is who we are. We are a people in process, not fixed, remembering and holding on to a past that no longer serves us. The loss of flora and fauna, breathtakingly devastating on one level. thinking of a world in which my children, your grandchildren perhaps, may never know polar bears except for the zoo or the Coca-Cola pictures that come up in the holiday season, reminding us the losses of this flora and fauna, reminding us that we are not masters and lords of the universe. Oh, how easy it is to slip into that fallacy, and we do as a species all the time. We are not masters and lords of the universe, but rather interdependent caretakers, interdependent, relying on the generosity of all that exists in the world around us, called to care for it, care for that abundance so that it can continue to thrive and exist for future generations. We can find, even in these hardest things, reminders of who we are, what our core values are as human beings, as Unitarian Universalists, and we can feel gratitude for that, for our commitments as a people, our genuine commitments, the ones that serve us, serve one another, and serve our planet. In this weekend of Thanksgiving, may it be so.
Gratitude is my religion. Thank you is my only prayer. These were the words of our guest, Satori Shakur, last week Sunday when she was visiting. And I was thinking, what if I joined that church? What if I practiced gratitude religiously? Would it change who I am? Would it change how I am in relationship with others? Gratitude is already a pretty consistent practice for me, but this past week I've been sitting with Satori's words, gratitude is my religion. We often say we practice a religion. Practicing anything can lead us to become more proficient at it. We can cultivate and nurture the skills needed. And in doing so, we experience a change in our bodies, in our minds, in our hearts, and literally in our brains. What happens when we actively practice gratitude? Environmental activist, author, and scholar of Buddhism, Joanna Macy, says that the great open secret of gratitude is that it is not dependent on external circumstances. It's like a channel we can switch on at any moment, no matter what's going on around us. It helps us connect to our basic right to be here, like breath does. She reminds us that the capitalist message is that we are insufficient and inadequate, and that we always need more stuff, more approval, more comfort, more money, more entertainment. And this only breeds dissatisfaction. But, she says, gratitude is liberating. It's subversive. It helps us realize that we are sufficient, and that frees us from this dissatisfaction. Expressing gratitude also has direct impact on our brains. There's quite a bit of research in the neuroscience world on this. In a recent article, The Neuroscience of Gratitude and How It Affects Anxiety and Grief, the author summarizes some of the recent findings. Research shows that when we express and receive gratitude, our brain releases dopamine and serotonin, the two critical neurotransmitters responsible for our emotions, and they make us feel good. They enhance our mood immediately, making us feel happy from the inside. By consciously practicing gratitude every day, we can strengthen these neural pathways and ultimately create a permanent, grateful, and positive nature within ourselves. Gratitude also goes a long way in affecting our overall biological functioning. especially the brain and the nervous system. Gratitude significantly impacts body functions and psychological conditions like stress, anxiety, and depression. Friends, what it comes down to is that practicing gratitude has many, many benefits. It might be easy to practice some days, and it might take no effort at all to express gratitude when things are going well. But what about when things are just downright an awful mess? Look at the world right now, coming on 2 years of a pandemic, millions of deaths, and as if global concerns are not enough, each of us have personal challenges. Difficult medical diagnoses, new or ongoing financial troubles. It may feel like work or school or relationships are changing, falling apart, ending. People we love have died. We might feel alone. What could we possibly be grateful for? There is always something, one thing, one tiny thing we can be grateful for. In oral histories from concentration camp survivors, a common thread in their stories is about how finding something to be thankful for every day, one small thing, despite horrific situation they were in, gave them strength and hope. Think about a time when when someone wrote you a note or had a short conversation with you to express gratitude. How did that feel? You probably felt seen and heard, connected, not alone, and the chemicals in your brain made you feel happy. I try to practice gratitude in the best and worst of times. It's worth giving it a try, especially when it seems hardest. When, like Lily in our story, your hollow places take up so much space inside of you. So today, we will spend a few moments in a short gratitude practice. You should have 2 pieces of paper and something to write with. First, I'd like you to think about something that you are grateful for. Maybe like Lily, it's the small things you never really noticed before, how the earth smelled or how the snowflake falls from the sky. And then next, I'd ask you to think about someone, a person or persons you are grateful for. You may write a name, and if you want, briefly say why you are expressing this gratitude. When you're done after the service, you can leave the pencils outside the doors in the baskets, and also, I'm going to invite you to leave one or both of the papers as well. I'm going to compile a word cloud of the collected gratitudes to share with us all. That's a visual, graphic representation of the words, and next Sunday you'll be able to see it. And if you are watching on live stream, you may write your gratitudes on paper at home, but I also invite you, if you're comfortable, to add something to the chat, which we will save, and then I'll add those words as well. So this is a personal practice. It's you and your paper and your thoughts. And it is a community practice that reminds us how we are connected, even though we are in physically distant spaces. So feel your brain, your mind, and your heart expanding as you focus your attention now on gratitude. As you finish, I'd also like to invite you to actively practice gratitude by expressing it directly to the person you have been thinking about, if that is possible, either in person or with a written note, an email, or a phone call. And if that is not possible, then intentionally express gratitude to someone else today and during this coming week. Meister Eckhart, the medieval German theologian, said, "If the only prayer you ever say in your entire life is thank you, it will be enough." Centuries later, we hear echoes of this in the words of Satori Shakur, "Gratitude is my religion, thank you is my only prayer." May we keep the practice of gratitude alive for centuries to come. Amen. May it be so.
Dear ones, if I could invite you now to rise in body or spirit. In spirit, if you're joining us at home, or live streaming or watching on demand, in person here, rising together as a community. Go into this new week following this time, this weekend dedicated to the concept of Thanksgiving, noticing and not brushing aside, as we so often do, the little ordinary miracles that we are constantly surrounded by, the immense beauty that it's merely a gift to be alive and experience. That alone, the immense gratitude for that, these precious, short little lives that we have. Compounding that beauty by all the smiles that touch us, the sparkling eyes when the masks are in place, the lives that we know that have touched our hearts positively and meaningfully. Notice these things. They're not small. And when you notice them and your heart fills up with love, for these are all expressions of love, the universe is ours for one another, let it flow. Gratitude and love are not things to hoard and hold on to. They are meant to flow and be shared. It's in that way that love and gratitude become exponential. Something far more powerful than something secretly held in our hearts. Share it generously, for it's meant to be shared. Know that as you navigate and experience all of that, you're held in the love and the grace of this community until we are together again. Go in peace. Go in love. Be love.